The False King and the Collapse of Yesod, a Sephirothic diagnosis of Sean Diddy Combs. Welcome back to another episode of Mirror of Minds TV, where we decode the hidden architecture behind power, identity, and the human soul. This is the place where psychology meets metaphysics, where the headlines are mirrors and the icons of our age are placed under the light of divine structure. Today, we enter one of the most explosive and scrutinized cases in modern entertainment history. A titan of music, fashion, and culture, now facing revelations that challenge the very foundation of his empire. But here at Mirror of Minds, we don't just ask what happened. We ask, what is the deeper soul pattern that created this collapse? What is the metaphysical map behind the man? This is not gossip. This is initiation. This is not scandal. This is a Sephirothic reckoning, a mirror of power, sex, and the shattered self. In the unfolding spectacle of Sean Diddy Combs' federal sex trafficking trial, the public is witnessing more than legal proceedings. It is witnessing the unraveling of a soul that once stood at the pinnacle of worldly power. But the tree of life does not measure a man by his fame. It measures him by the alignment of his inner architecture to divine order. In this diagnosis, we expose the metaphysical fractures that define the collapse of a man who became a god to himself and desecrated the very foundation of what it means to be human. Yesod, the foundation. Defiled. Yesod is the etheric matrix, the sexual and imaginative base where divine forces enter form. It is where life, image, and energy flow into manifestation. But when Yesod is severed from Tifereth, soul consciousness, and ruled instead by distorted Had, image, and fallen Gebura, power, it becomes a breeding ground for inversion. In Diddy's case, Yesod is not a vessel for life, but a theater of possession. The infamous freak-offs were not merely acts of lust, they were rituals of dominance. Reports of coordinated multi-day sex parties, surveillance-controlled bedrooms, escorts choreographed like pawns, and the use of others' bodies for voyeuristic pleasure reveal a desecration of the sexual plane. He did not seek union. He sought control through fragmentation. Others became objects by which he could simulate omnipotence, because internally he had already become empty. This is sexual alchemy inverted. Where sacred union was meant to raise consciousness through polarity, Diddy inverted polarity to feed a collapsed self. Gebura, the abuse of severity. Gebura is divine discipline, justice, and righteous power. But in imbalance, it becomes tyranny, cruelty, and control. Diddy's compulsion to dominate every sexual scenario, dictating who performed what act, who watched, and who obeyed, is not strength. It is karmic inflation and a fear-based obsession with control. Such behavior always originates from a core spiritual insecurity, the terror of being powerless within. The more he projected omnipotence externally, the more his inner void demanded sacrifice. This is not unlike ancient tyrants who offered others to the fire to prove their own divinity. Testimonies of physical assaults, coercive bribery, and obsessive surveillance all reveal a man whose geburic function is diseased. Instead of being the arm of divine judgment, he became the fist of personal paranoia. This is Gebura with no moral axis, cut off from Chesed's mercy and from Tifereth's balance. He lost the internal throne, so he built external prisons for everyone else. The illusory glory. Had is the Sephiroth of intellect, language, image, and persona. It is the mask we wear to interface with the world. When Had is healthy, it reflects the inner light of Tifereth outward. But when Had is separated from the heart, it becomes a hall of mirrors, reflecting false glory and feeding illusion. Diddy is a master of Had, the mogul, the empire builder, the name changer, the brand. But the trial has pulled back the curtain, revealing a soul possessed by the illusion of invincibility. He did not just craft a public image, He believed he was the image. And when that image was threatened, he used sex, money, fear, and surveillance to maintain it. In metaphysical terms, this is Hod eclipsing Yesod, generating endless mental simulations and performative rituals to suppress the rising agony of a fractured self. Tifereth, the silenced soul. Tifereth is the true self, the heart of the tree, the solar center of divine balance. It is where love, purpose, and divine identity reside. But when the soul is severed from this center, all power becomes compensatory. Diddy's compulsive need to orchestrate, direct, and manipulate reflects a soul that has not heard its own voice in decades. The evidence suggests a man who has lost access to his own spiritual essence. He replaces intimacy with surveillance. He substitutes joy with domination. And he feeds on others' energies because he has forgotten the source of his own. This is not merely about sexual addiction. It is a collapse of inner sovereignty. The abuse of power is not just about what he did to others. It is about what he has done to himself. The divine throne within Tifereth stands empty, abandoned, perhaps even feared. And so, he builds empires, not to create, but to distract from the absence of God within. Netzach, the shadow of desire. Netzach governs desire, magnetism, and emotional conquest. In Diddy, Netzach became excessive appetite, a restless need to dominate, to expand, to consume others as extensions of his will. These freak-offs are the outer manifestation of a Netzachic addiction to stimulation, where more was never enough, and satisfaction was a myth chased by chaos. But the danger of untamed Netzach is that it seeks love through conquest. Instead of cultivating union, it replaces connection with performance. The soul is left exhausted, still unloved, still unseen, and ultimately, still alone. Dath, the gateway misused. Dath is the abyssal threshold between the higher and lower worlds, the secret knowledge that allows integration or collapse. Diddy's life became a distorted gateway, where divine energies fell into personal ego, where sacred knowledge of power, attraction, and influence was misused to imprison rather than liberate. The symbolism of watching others have sex, of orchestrating rituals of pleasure, where he himself remains emotionally removed, is a parody of divine gnosis. He stood at Dath, but he turned back toward Malkuth, hoarding power instead of transcending it. The cosmic consequence, collapse of the false king. In Kabbalistic terms, Diddy ascended through external power, not internal initiation. He crowned himself without coronation by the soul. The empire was built on Yesodic corruption, Geburic fear, Hodic illusion, and Tiferethic silence. And now, as with all false kings, the structure collapses. He is not being judged merely in a court of law. He is being judged by the tree itself. Closing thesis, the Sephirothic warning. This case is not just about one man. It is about what happens when divine structure is ignored. When sex becomes control, when power becomes obsession, when image becomes identity, and when the soul becomes silent, the human becomes a god to himself, and the fall is inevitable. Diddy's trial is a trial of our culture, of our idols, and of ourselves. The tree of life remains unbroken, but those who attempt to bypass it, those who usurp divine power without purification, will ultimately be undone by the very forces they thought they controlled.